The results were both disappointing and surprising. Disappointing because at the same TDP and power settings, the Z2E's peripheral power consumption wasn't much lower than the 370's. For example, in Hades 2 at 6W TDP, the Z2E is about 1W lower, but total power consumption is already around 10W. Converted to battery life, that would be about 16 minutes more than the 370, lasting nearly 8 hours. For God of War 4, at the starting point, fixed perspective, and 10W TDP, there's a slight frame rate difference. The Z2E draws about 3W less power, just over 23W, while the 370 hits 27W. Battery life would theoretically be 20 minutes longer, estimated at 3 hours and 20 minutes. The surprise is, if we think about it differently, when setting both handhelds to the same total power consumption, drawing nearly 27W from the battery, the Z2E's frame rate is 2 to 3 frames higher than the 370's. A performance gap of about 6%. Now, for a high-power scenario, Black Myth, Wukong, 77% battery, 30W TDP, game frame rate is around 70 frames per second. The Z2E's peripheral power control is still about 2W lower, at around 42W, while the 370 reaches 45W. It appears that cutting CPU cores does have some effect. The theoretical battery life at this point approaches 2 hours. Okay, next question. How many frames can the Z2E get in various games, and how long can it last? Let's check out a fighting game. Dragon Ball Sparking. 0, 1200p, default high settings, 15W TDP, frame rate is around 30 FPS. This game is quite demanding. Total power consumption is 24W, so battery life is less than, the estimated battery life is 3 hours and 20 minutes. When the TDP increased to 30W, the game reached around 40 FPS, a performance boost of about 30%. This was also seen in the TimeSpy benchmark. With the latest BIOS, the 15W score was 2,739, and at 30W it was 3,529, a 29% performance difference. The 35W score, it remains almost unchanged at 3,590. Now back to the game. The total power consumption is currently 45W, with a playtime of nearly 1 hour and 46 minutes. For shooter games like Call of Duty Black Ops 6 running at 1200p resolution with FSR1 enabled and a 15W TDP, the frame rate is actually quite good, over 40 FPS. It's really well optimized. The total power consumption at this point is approximately 22W, allowing for about 3 hours and 30 minutes of playtime. Once the TDP is boosted to 23W, the game instantly reaches 50 to 60 frames per second, providing an exceptionally smooth visual experience. Total power consumption stands at 32W with an estimated 2.5 hours of theoretical battery life. Alright, let's move on to mainstream action-adventure titles. The Last of Us Part 2. This game is an absolute marvel of optimization. At 1200p with default high graphics and no frame generation enabled, it only requires a 14W TDP to consistently deliver 30 frames per second. The frame rate curve is remarkably smooth, providing a visual fluidity that is essentially on par with console platforms. With a total power consumption of 25W, you can enjoy playing for slightly over 3 hours. God of War 5 without frame generation enabled at 10W TDP, the frame rate is merely around 30 FPS. The game has substantial performance demands, yet it offers both a high refresh rate and a variable refresh rate. If we manage to consistently maintain 30 frames per second, the overall fluidity would actually be quite good. Once frame generation is activated, the game reaches around 45-ish frames per second. It's smooth enough, but there's some input lag. Battery life-wise, with 9W peripheral and 24W total consumption, you can play for a bit over 3 hours. When the TDP is boosted to 30W and frame generation is enabled, the frame rate climbs to about 50 to 60 frames per second. At this point, there's virtually no perceptible delay, and the display is incredibly fluid. With the battery at 63%, the peripheral power consumption is 13W, and the overall power consumption reaches 43W, providing nearly 1 hour and 50 minutes of battery life. In terms of cooling and noise, the MSI Claw A8 performs exceptionally well. Since many other YouTubers have already covered the dual-port setup, your brother Mike is going to show you a demo with a more performance-demanding game. God of War 5 with power consumption set to 30 watts and other settings at default. After playing for 20 minutes at the current room temperature, the highest temperature on the body reached 46 degrees, namely, it's concentrated near the top of the screen. You can definitely feel the warmth when you touch it. The grip area's temperature is well maintained at around 32 degrees Celsius, so you can barely perceive any heat, which makes it very comfortable to hold. The fan noise performance at this point is quite good, measuring only 39 decibels. In a quiet environment, you might notice a slight fan hum, but it's noticeably quieter than other PC handhelds. I must say, the dual fan cooling is seriously impressive. Alright, that's all for this review. If you found it helpful, please give a like, comment, and share it with your friends. So what do you think of the MSI Claw A8's performance? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next handheld review.